Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we are joined by Shaun Bernstein here, and he is going to tell us about his interesting path to get into law and to get out of law, and fusing sort of his interests there, and what he's doing now with the Right Stuff agency. So, thank you so much, Shaun, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Now, Shaun, maybe we could start. Were you always kind of interested in law, or was that something that you kind of got into? And maybe tell us a little bit about your story there and getting to what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah. So I meet kids, especially when you meet people in law school who say they've wanted this forever. They were the little kid arguing, for more dessert or for against nap time, and they've tried to sort of make their case, and this is what they wanted since they were a small child. That wasn't me. That was never me. I was actually more the journalist, and sort of where I started first. I was the one asking questions, having conversations, try to sort of get at the story. And that's really where I saw myself. I had some lawyers in the family. My uncle is a partner on Bay Street. My mother practiced for a couple of years. She stopped before I was born. A lot of her classmates are no longer practicing. So I sort of saw law from both ends, growing up as the crazy go, go, go Bay Street life and the, oh, you can do other things with a law degree uh, aspect to it. And I had always sort of seen that ladder as, my mother would teach me that law was a stepping stone. It's if you want to be a lawyer, that's great, but you can use a law degree to sort of teach you how to think and as a road to doing other things. So I never really saw it as that set box. I started as a journalist. That's sort of what I was editing the elementary school newspaper and the high school newspaper. I went into journalism school at 17 and loved it. I actually got sick and I had to leave. Finished with an English degree and then went back. I had written the LSATs a few times because I figured, what do you do with an English degree? Okay, so maybe laws on the horizon. And I didn't do too well at the LSAT. So, what, this is not for me right now. And I sat down with someone who said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a journalist. They said, go do it. So I did. I went to a grad program for journalism and I loved it. I trained in radio, so I'm having so much fun here, and television and newspapers and magazines and web writing and interview skills and photography just across the board. Had the absolute time of my life. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of jobs in media, so that kind of ruled that out. I worked for one paid day at CBC, which I'm still proud of that pay stub, but that was kind of the after my internship, but that was kind of the extent of my, big world media career. And I sort of had to say, okay, what's coming next? And law was always on that, alternate plan, back burner. Maybe I'm going to do this. And, when I couldn't really make it go of the career that I wanted, I said, okay, this is time to really give this a full effort. And I signed up that day for the LSATs again, took them one more time after that, and then finally got myself into Windsor Law and went to law school. Uh, Keep going with sort of a little bit more of my story.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I mean, what kind of, how was it like going back? I know you certainly had three different eras there of school. Um, Certainly law school, there's a bunch of different, there's the people that come fresh out of undergrad, a lot of mature students. What did you find in terms of that initial period there of, hey, this is what I still want to do?
Yeah, law school is an interesting place, right? It's really so I went in at 25. And at 25, I felt like an old man. I'm a little older than that now. But, there's certainly the folks that go in at 21, 22. And my mother went in at 20. That was back in the day. You could go in after 3 years very simply. And she just kind of coasted. She never finished a BA, just kind of coasted from one to the other. I think she did 2 years of an undergrad degree. And so, there's those folks who just like it's just more school. It's just, unless you're kind of in for 6, 7 years and you come out with your law degree and that's it. That wasn't me. I spent a year working as I was sort of prepping for law school. I was working in HR, which led to my employment law background. And, so I knew, I couldn't tell you I knew how the world worked, but I felt like I knew, a couple things that I might not have known at 22. And then there's another crop of students as well. You have a couple mature students every year because it's great to sort of have them with their perspective. My first day of law school, they had a few of us up to the front in the moot court to play two truths and a lie, get to know your classmates. And my friend Amy, one of her lines was that she has 6 children. And we're kind of going like, okay, there's no way that you got 6 kids. No, she had 6 children and was a single mother of 6 kids and we're starting law school and had one of those remarkable life stories of anybody that I know is one of those remarkable people that I know today. So people come in with all kinds of different backgrounds and different life stories and different experiences. And, you're all come in with a different, pair of glasses and the way you see the world, but you're all in the same boat at the same time and you're going through it together. So it's neat that way.
And what about did you find in terms of having this English and journalism background and getting into law school, does that give you a leg up on everyone with case briefs and legal memos and things like that?
It's funny that you ask that because it does and it doesn't is kind of the short answer to your question. I wrote a first assignment, my legal writing. I loved my legal writing prof. She is wonderful. And I had my first assignment and I don't think I did well. I was never my writing is funny because I'm a storyteller. And so I was never good at essays in school. My marks were never, I got B's, but marks were never amazing. I knew areas where I was really strong, areas where I wasn't, but papers really aren't my thing because I'm not an in the box thinker. And my legal writing prof sat me down and said, okay, you're going to do really well at A, B, and C, and you're going to really hate doing D, E, and F. And if I remember correctly, it's, you're going to love writing demand letters because you get to have fun and be colorful. And you're going to hate writing pleadings because it's totally in the box. And she was right. So it does help with sort of how I fact find, how I talk to people. I tell myself that I can talk to anybody about anything, and I try to be like that. I did a moot competition in my last year of law school, sort of a mock trial course, where we were doing, it was the client consultation competition, it's called. We had to sort of do a mock client intake and a mock client interview. And part of the competition is that every client is, they're all sort of actors or students playing roles, and they have a hidden fact, it's called. There's part of their story that, like any real client, there's always part of the story they're not telling you. And your job during that consult is to find the hidden fact. And I was on it like a pig hunting truffles. I always got it. I always uncovered it. It's like playing Clue. You're just kind of getting right in there, trying to find out sort of the whole story. So there's certainly elements of it that were really helpful.
Now, kind of looking back then on the law school experience, anything there in terms of students? I often have some law students listening in there. Of what can you share from that really worked for you, and what if anything you would do differently if you got another crack at it, or if you wanted another crack at it, it's another story. But if you had to go back, what would you do differently?
If I had to go back and do it differently, it's funny. The advice that I got going in was, do what got you here. Was actually the way it was told to me. You were successful enough in your academics to get into law school. You developed habits that worked for you. Stick with those and do those. And unfortunately, in my case, they weren't great study habits. So it didn't mean, studying that hard or being, super ready for that next exam. I had a lot of friends, you're used to probably being smart. If you're going to law school, you're probably surrounding yourself with people who think that you're really smart. And then you get to law school, and there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than you. And even if you're really smart, there's always people who are much smarter than you. And I remember from the year above me, the person who got the top mark in the class was a mature student, but she was rigorous. She took multiple notes on every single page of text that she read, and was absolutely on the ball. I mean, she could publish her notes tomorrow in an academic journal. And the person who got the second highest mark did no reading, never had cracked a book, but he was a guy who went to lecture and wrote down every word. And never missed a lecture and had an encyclopedic knowledge of what was in those lectures. Was able to kind of spin that into his thing. I would probably advocate more of the first than the second, but everyone's kind of got their own approach to how they take it on. So, what I have studied harder, sure. What I've gotten better grades, sure. I try to sort of find the blend in the academics and the social and the community involvement, and make it all work, in a way that I play to my strengths and my interests and try to sort of take what I could from the experience.
Yeah, so in terms of that kind of blend there, and certainly at Windsor, a lot of the focus of access to justice as well. What are some of the things that a law student looking to go into law school, or some of them that have just now maybe month two, what are the things there that you found really helped in terms of finding that balance?
So, there's a lot of pressure, I think, when you go into law school about what kind of lawyer do you want to be. And people will ask you, people who don't know law will ask you, what kind of lawyer do you want to be? And you probably don't have a clue. And that's fine. And you might get to do firm tours if those ever come back, in your first summer, and you'll talk to, Bay Street recruiters, maybe. And they'll tell you, if you don't know what you want to do, that's perfectly fine. There's no magic formula. If you have to take X and Y course to get to Z, there's no magic formula. If you have to have this exact degree to get into this program, there's some areas of law where a certain background helps, but you have to have exactly A, B, and C, or you have to have, exactly this work experience on your resume. No, there's all kinds of different ways of getting to your end goal. So, if you're going into it, I'd say stay open, stay flexible, learn things, start to really explore. First year of law is confusing for a lot of people because you're learning a whole new language. And it seems like you're taking property law, learning concepts from the 1500s, wondering why the heck is any of this important? And I don't know that I have the answer right away. But when you study something like property, you see how it leads to things like real estate and like wills and estates and actual areas of law that are interesting and of a real public benefit to people. It all kind of comes together. The constitutional law, again, I mean, how many actual constitutional lawyers are there in any given country? Here in the US, there's only a handful of people that really do constitutional cases. But things like the charter come in and play with employment that I used to do and human rights work and all other areas. There are a lot of different things that you can do with a law degree. And, your world really starts to open up the more you learn about it. So stay open, stay broad, and sort of feel your way out for where you want to head.
So we're just talking about writing there, and legal writing in particular, right? And you were saying, look, there's some things that will work out based on your background, some things that won't be so good for you. What did you find in terms of starting? You particularly liked obviously the professor there, and presumably the material there. I actually have students who are just starting, and a couple of weeks from now they'll be doing legal research and writing with me, and it's always it's difficult to kind of get used to memo writing and case briefs and sometimes very technical things. But what can you share from all of your experience with journalism and law school and legal writing that they can really kind of benefit from?
I'd say remember the story. I'm really interested still in the sociology of law. I actually proposed almost a sociological paper when I was in law school. I was looking at the people behind cases, and I do that in my work today. If you're going to read a case and you're going to read one of these landmark decisions, if it's in a textbook, whether it's a criminal case or a constitutional case, remember there's a person there. And there's a person there who, and when you start to really know the legal system for how much time and money and sweat equity they put into fighting their case through, trial level, through appeal, if it went to the Supreme Court, years we're talking, how much went into that. There's a human story there at the heart of everything. Don't just treat it like a ratio and obiter and it means this, and yeah, that's going to be helpful to get you through school and get you on the exam, but you're going to become a better lawyer by really remembering at the heart of the day that there's a client there and there's a person there, and telling their story is going to be what makes you a more convincing legal writer in really almost any format, because that story is going to be what comes into play in any demand letter. It's going to come into play in your correspondence. It's going to come into play in your pleadings. So getting to really know that client, know that story, know why they're fighting, and know what they're fighting for, I think that makes you a better lawyer and a better writer in any sort of legal writing.
Now, after law school, and you mentioned you had a little bit of a HR background there, kind of simultaneously before. What was that still the goal then right away? Is like, I want to article and get into employment law, or were you still kind of with a broad path? Anything's kind of, I'm open to anything. Let's see how it goes.
So I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew enough. My uncle is a tax lawyer, and I knew I didn't want to do tax because it didn't seem like it was really up my alley. And with that HR background, I come from a family of employers and business owners. And then when I was working with HR, I was recruiting, but I was recruiting very vulnerable candidates and sort of really working with vulnerable populations and sort of seeing the world through small business owners, but also through those vulnerable employee populations and employment rights work, et cetera. And I realized how important it can be. And I started taking, employment law and labor, and I really loved the area. It made sense to me because as a journalist, I love people and I love talking with people and obviously telling stories. And so that sort of seemed to be a very story-based law. So I liked it. I had done a summer at a firm that did, employment in HR, and that was a great experience to really get my feet wet. I articled. I had a hard time finding an articling position because the articling crisis had gotten pretty bad when I was looking. But I talked a full service firm into hiring me. They hadn't hired a student in decades. I was the first one who they had done in a long time, and I sort of I joked that I conned them into it. And I got in through their employment lawyer, who I am still very close with. But I'm lucky that I got that full service experience. That was if there's any advice for articling, try to get as broad as you can, just be able to touch on a little bit of everything. It's great to know one area really well, and that's helpful. But the more that you know a little bit of other things, it's going to help you even in that one area, because areas of law crisscross all the time and in ways that you wouldn't even expect. So it's helpful to do that. But coming out of that article, and I had done some corporate work in my articles. I didn't want to do any corporate. I had done a little bit of family work. I didn't want to practice family. I knew my heart was in employment, and thankfully it's a really burgeoning area of the bar. It's a big practice. There's a lot of firms. There's new firms opening all the time. So there were jobs out there, and I am a networker till my last day. I love pandemic has been hard, but I love getting to events and talking to people and meeting people. And so I sort of, was able to really work that network and find the jobs that I had. And it was not easy all the time. But, find the opportunities that I had to work that network and sort of find homes that, for firms that would take me, and then building books of business at those firms. So that's sort of where I, took myself from there.
Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned there, and certainly I had the same issue with articling and just securing it. I think around this time, the students kind of in third year are obviously looking towards articling positions, and I know there's some opportunities like with the LPP through Ryerson, for example. But what can you share kind of from that? I mean, did you ever feel discouraged? Like, that's it. Like, I'm so close, obviously, maybe to getting called, but I just need this one little thing there. Or how did you kind of keep powering through that whole articling crisis at that time?
Yeah, it's tough. The LPP was just coming together when I was finishing up school. So it was very kind of early. I think my cohort was the first year maybe of the LPP. So it was possibly an option, but it was very early days. Um, I am a serial optimist, which helped. I'm a serial networker, like I said, which helped. I just kind of kept pushing through. I went to a networking dinner. The employment law bar has sort of an annual holiday party that's usually a couple hundred lawyers get together. It used to be fairly frequent. Now it's a once a year thing. I had gone before and I loved it. And I loved, meeting, colleagues and working the room. And I was coming in actually to meet with somebody in Toronto the day after, but I wound up meeting her at this dinner. And, she heard my story and she said, "You need a champion. You're going to meet people as a law student who are going to like you, and you're going to connect. And lawyers, who they may not be in a position to hire, but they're happy to kind of keep an ear to the ground. And if they can help you, they'd love to. And that's genuine and that's great." But she said, you don't need that. You need a champion, somebody who's actually going to go out and try to help you open a door, because those doors are heavy and they're not easy as a student to open on your own. And she, suggested a couple names of people I should contact directly, and I ran with the ball. One of them was the guy who hired me. But you need somebody who's really willing to make an effort. Take every meeting you can, And just be present, be top of mind, keep in touch, stay connected, but take everyone kind of at the value of what they give you. So if they tell you that they're going to, they'll keep an eye out for you, that's great. But know that it might not be an active eye. I have people in the bar that I'm friends with, and when I've been looking, historically, they've said, oh, keep an eye out and what have you. And 3 weeks later, they've hired someone else. And that stings. But I was not there 3 weeks later when they we're looking. So I'm not saying hound everybody every week. That would be absurd. But find your champions. Know when you're really connecting with somebody. Seek advice, seek connections, find people who are really willing to go that extra mile and help you out. Because to that friend, still I call her my good luck charm. Those people are invaluable to helping you get there, and you'll get there. Not everybody gets jobs to OCIs. Not everybody gets jobs, through crazy connections. People really hustle it. I created my own. This firm had no interest in hiring. They weren't prepared to do that. So you got to get a little creative sometimes, but you can make some cool stuff work.
So you get through that point, you finish your article and you get called, and then you get into practicing employment law. So what was that like then, making that transition then into from articling student to an associate? And what did you find at the places that you were working? Was that everything you wanted at that point, or what kind of were the good and the bad, or what happened?
I'm happy to spill a little tea because there's some interesting stories there. So I article at a firm that I loved, but I knew there was no chance of hire back. They weren't looking. This was 4 or 5 lawyers. They weren't looking for another lawyer, and that was okay. I'm glad that I knew that going in, and that might be a position you find yourself in, and take that for what it's worth, because it can be a lot easier to be able then to go out and network. And they were fully supportive of my search moving forward. I actually did find something coming out of articles that I had signed off on, and that opportunity collapsed on me. So I was about to sort of move into my first job, and that opportunity fell apart. And that was a tough pill to swallow. And I kind of went, okay, this is interesting. And I spent my first 6 months of being called to the bar looking for work, which again was sort of that same hustle that I was used to. It was that hustle all over again, and networking and taking meetings and applying to things. And hiring often doesn't happen overnight. You might be looking and talking with someone, and they're ready to move in a month, 3 months, 6 months, and that's great for them. It's not so great for you. So you gotta stay optimistic. You gotta keep your chin up. You can't give up faith or give up on yourself, because if you stop betting on yourself, that's when you really lose. I wound up, a couple opportunities came together at the same time. I took the one that was a very small upstart firm, but that was going to let me build a book of business. She really this was someone who was a sole practicing lawyer and had brought on 2 associates, myself and another person my year. And this person was only a year ahead of us. So all of us were learning as we went. And it was a really interesting experience to start my career. I will say that. I am someone who actually loves getting out there and doing the sales and the business development, which, we can talk about the business of law separately. As any lawyer will tell you, law is a business and law is business development as much as it is practice. So I enjoyed that. This firm was not the right fit for anything else. It was not, this person did not have their structure together as sort of they expected to, and things really were not going well. And so I left about 5 months in. And then I was wondering again, okay, what comes next? What happens here? I ended up doing what they call doc reviews and due diligence work, where they hire sort of lawyers on contract, which is a lot of lawyers wind up doing that work. There's no shame in it. It's not the most exciting, but there's no shame in it, because they can be great work to kind of keep you steady until you wind up on your feet. And I did that for a couple months coming out of practice. I wound up, I've had this sort of all over the place career. To make long story short, I took a job on Bay Street in a marketing role. They were looking for a lawyer who could write to work in the marketing department of a big firm, and I jumped at that. And that was really fun. And this was me saying, okay, tried law, not for me. I'm done. I'm out. That's it. And I only went back after I had sort of decided I was going to really stick this out. And, I had this great manager and this great team, and the firm treated me like gold. And I was so happy. And I was just lucky to be there. I was kissing the ground. And the dream firm that I had always wanted to work at, and, one that I had been dancing with for like 5 years since I was a summer student. And I know this guy super well. And at that dinner I was talking about, I talked to one of the associates there. I said, "So when are you guys hiring?" She said, "Well, like we talk about it, but we're just not there yet. We're not. It's not going to happen anytime soon." I said, "Okay, that's fine." And I'd interviewed with them and the whole thing, but they just weren't ready. And I got the call, and one of the lawyers was going on leave, and the owner said, "If you want to come join us, this is the time to do it." And I hemmed and hawed, and I talked to my boss, and she said, "Go." And I did. I left Bay Street to go back into practice because I had only practiced for a couple months really. And I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity. So I jumped at a firm that I had wanted to work at for a very long time, and went to go practice there.
And so you did that for a year. So what was that like? And it's interesting because you kind of went from practicing, you went into writing there at the Bay Street firm, and then back into practice to what you wanted years earlier. So what happened?
I went into exactly what I wanted. It was, who I wanted to be working with, and it was, the work that I wanted to be doing. I thought, okay, this is it. This is just everything that I had wanted. And the first couple of months were great. And then I learned, as time went on, that this really wasn't for me. There were a lot of pieces, and I don't want to, I'm not going to poo-poo the firm because they're now a client and they're friends, and it's not their fault. But I learned sort of, over time, this is not what I wanted to do long term. I had never, and I mean, I don't think I really talked about this earlier, but even when I was going into law, I didn't see myself practicing law forever. I said, okay, let me give this 10 years. Let me give it 5 years and see, what it looks like. I lasted about 3. Um, I kind of, never, it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm making partner in a decade and I'm going to have this corner office and I'm going to look at this little inch of Lake Ontario and make my crazy, stupid money and be happy. That wasn't my life. That was never sort of what I imagined. So it wasn't like I was, had those crazy hoop dreams. I was always a small firm guy. I summered small firm, articled small firm, 5 lawyers or less. Like that was sort of my sweet spot where I could really kind of shine and be an individual. And I, was doing really, I think, pretty good work, and my clients liked me, and that was great. But I came to realize that this is not what I want to be doing. This was really starting to get very detrimental for my mental health, quite honestly. Just various job stresses that came with the practice of law that started to really wear and tear and got much worse as time went on. You encounter difficult clients, you encounter difficult situations. Even in a great situation, you struggle to meet billable targets sometimes. Um, pardon me, you have stresses that come up in any firm in any area of law. And if you love what you're doing, if you love what you're doing, then that's part of the job and that's the nature of the beast. But I was having real struggles as time went on. And I, went to go pursue some counseling. And the person I spoke to said, you're not depressed, you just need a new job. No, that's revelatory. That's interesting. And I took 2 weeks off. I had just gotten married. I went on my honeymoon. And, had this lovely time in Europe with my wife, and checked the odd email, but mostly turned my phone off and said, okay, like this is just gotta, get through the honeymoon. I got the honeymoon. Honeymoon was lovely, totally decompressed my mind. And I went back to work. Within 3 days, I was kind of right back to where I was. And my mental health really started to shatter under sort of the various stresses of the job. And things got pretty bad and pretty dark. I realized that, yeah, look, I had some challenges with the firm, as any young lawyer has challenges with their firm. You pick, the things you like, the things you don't. But I realized that it wasn't the firm that was the real problem. If I'd gone anywhere else, I would have had the same issues. It was really, this is not the right fit for me that I came to learn. So I had a permanent position covering what was ostensibly a mat leave. And as the leave was winding down, I just said to them, yeah, this is this is not working for me anymore. And I actually left on sick leave and didn't go back.
So I saw a question here from one of the students about dealing with stress, and certainly we were talking about mental health there and the related work stress. Is there anything on how you dealt with it at the time? And certainly students who go in and, as you said, the nature of the beast, even if it's something they really like, that would you say? I mean, again, everyone's different, but in terms of how to deal with kind of the stress and anxiety of the practice of law that a conversation is coming up here 20 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, it wasn't the same conversations, and certainly we still have a ways to go. But what can you share kind of how you dealt with it, and how advice for maybe students who are looking at, can I cope with that stress?
So I'd say two things. You're 100% right, JP. The conversation's coming a long way. There is certainly more attention being paid. I think, unfortunately, some of it is still lip service. There's still certainly environments where, yeah, we talk about mental health and we can have a conversation. But if you actually experience symptoms of, this, all you're going to be seen as not being able to cut it. And that would be my concern, I think, if I was at a larger firm. The hours articling on Bay Street, and I was friends with the articling kids, at the firm I was with, were ridiculous. They're working like 16, 18-hour days, 6, 7 days a week. That's nuts. And that's a great place to work, but those hours are crazy. That's not sustainable for anybody. I don't care how devoted you are to the work. Like, it is not a sustainable model. And I was a small firm. I was not working those hours there. And I was not working those hours with the firms that I was with by any means. My firms were great to me, and it wasn't really an hours thing. But you have to find time to unwind. You have to. You're a battery that needs recharging. So you have to find ways that are going to help you beat the stress, whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation. And I was doing those to really sort of get myself through the harder days for sure. Whether it's your faith, whether it's exercise, find things that will help you, number one, cope with your stress level and keep your health in check. Because if you lose that, you're in trouble. And then, the other piece that I'll talk about is I would go to, young lawyers events and young lawyers dinners, and we'd have, candid conversations with the senior counsel, and they'd say, how do I know if this isn't for me? And I heard one lawyer, it stuck with me. She mentioned the 3-week test. You're going to have days that are hard. You're going to have days that are miserable and days that you hate your job, even if you're doing the work you love. I'm doing now work that I absolutely love. I'm living my dream, and I have hard days. We all have hard days at work. You're going to have hard weeks. There's some weeks where, some weeks you're the pigeon, some weeks you're the statue, and that's fine. But if it's really long-term and consistent, that you're waking up every day miserable, and her litmus test for 3 weeks. If you have really sort of 3 weeks where every day you're going, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't do this anymore. That might be a sign that this is not for you. You're not in the right fit, whether it's the wrong firm, the wrong area of law, or practice altogether. Listen to your body, listen to your mind, listen to the signs, work on your stress, seek mentorship, everything they'll tell you to do, but also realize that at a certain point, it's hard to make a square peg fit a round hole.
And in terms of that, I mean, sometimes it's like you've invested, it's kind of like, I think in accounting, it's like the sunk cost wasn't really good subject for me either there. But in terms of like you've gone through this, and certainly all the struggles, and for those maybe who are on Bay Street or wherever, how hard is it to let go? I mean, not even in your own experience, say now, a couple of years later, am I 100% happy with the decision I made? And is that itch for certainly we come into contact with about employment law issues here and there. Do you feel like, hey, I want to go back at any point, or do you think this is what worked out and not looking back at all?
I don't have a moment's regret about the decision that I made. I think if I hadn't gone back for that extra year, I probably would have. I probably would have said, you know what, I didn't really give this a fair shake. I practiced under some really rough circumstances. I was not getting paid. I was, barely eking out a living in that first go. It was just rough, kind of altogether. Um, so that's a hard place to start a career, and that's a hard first impression to make. And it's, you have that with people sometimes. You make a bad first impression, you really want to do over. So I made sure that I got that do over. I don't know that I would have gone back on my own accord, but the opportunity came up. I'm glad that I took it, because it taught me that I do not want to do this at all. I now have frank conversations with my former employer, the one that I was there for the year, and like I said, they're now a client. And he tells me how happy I seem. I said, it feels like a strange thing to say to you, but yeah, I'm definitely where I'm meant to be now, doing the work that I'm doing, because I sort of realized. So, you know, listen to yourself and kind of be honest with that. I would sooner, I know, that I have that, and thankfully business has been good, knock on something, and I've been able to make a go at what I'm doing now. If I hadn't, I'd probably sooner off become a barista than I would go back to practicing law. I know that license is there as a safety net, and if my wife and I were absolutely, famished and this was all that I could do, I'd probably turn my license back on. But not voluntarily. If I never touch another file again, I will be a happy man.
Now on that, I mean, so what kind of brought you into the decision of what you're doing today, and maybe tell us a bit of what you're doing and how it's kind of been working for you.
Sure. So I had always written and I'd always told stories, and that comes back from the journalism. I was the kid in grade 6 interviewing the head of the Parents Association at my school for the elementary school newspaper kind of thing. And for the high school newspaper, I had a press pass, so I was interviewing whoever I could. And just love talking to people and telling stories and telling their stories. And I had always written for businesses. The firms that I was with, I was always the one tasked with writing blogs. The last firm that I was with, he's a very prolific writer, publishes in multiple different sources, is quoted constantly by media, and the firm helps out with a lot of those pieces. He credits lawyers with them, but helped out with a lot of that stuff. So I got to sort of write really a fair amount for firms that I was with, for other firms. The one thing that I did do that I didn't talk about is when I was not practicing, when I first was called to the bar, started my own law blog. It was called News from the Break Room, and it really sort of explained employment law in very plain language to, as I called it, employers, employees, and everyone in between. I won 2 national blog awards, which I'm still very proud of. Never monetized the darn thing. It wasn't meant, to pick up clients. I guess I could have if I was running a practice. But it was really just sort of, me using my skills as public legal education to kind of get that knowledge out in a way that people can actually understand. Because so many times, law is learning a new language. If you're going into a law program, you're learning a whole new language. And what you don't realize when you're immersed is that the public does not speak that language. So you're suddenly going back out into an environment and speaking a language that, people around you don't understand. And not a lot of lawyers are good at translating that, legal jargon and those complicated concepts into plain language that's actually usable and intelligible. And it's one thing that it's a skill that I always had and that I'm lucky to have. So I understood, the necessity of doing that for marketing purposes. And I have a partner who's much smarter than I am, and she kind of elbowed me and said, maybe there's something here. And so when I was looking, and I was doing some of that doc review again, but I was looking at what to do next. And actually about 2 years ago, next week, which was wild, I hung a shingle and said, okay, you know what? I put together the most bare bones website and said, hey, I'm available for copywriting. I had never ghostwritten before. I had written, for, like I said, firms and other companies, but I was a writer and my name was on everything and my byline was on everything. And, that doesn't pay very much. There's a lot of money in content writing if you're willing to, take your pride out of the equation and keep your ego at the door. And I'm more than willing to do that. So I hung, this bare bones shingle of, hey, a single post thing. Hey, I'm here and I'm available to, handle some content writing, and a couple, blog samples of firms I was with, and a short bio. And thankfully, I have this great, warm network, and people knew that I was a writer, and they said, "Hey, can you do this? And can you do this? And can you do this?" And I went, "Sure." For me, it's all just different forms of storytelling. So I was handling all this, crazy stuff, from writing about the fashion industry to high-end custom kitchens, to real estate, to criminal law, etc. And the business kind of started with all these varied copywriting assignments. And then when those kind of wound down, I said, okay, you know what? There's a business here. What is this really? And I sort of developed myself into a digital marketing agency, really as a content writing agency. And said, okay, what am I doing here? I do a lot of work with lawyers now, in all areas of the bar, because I can understand and talk the talk with them, but I can translate that to make it simple. I just had a call earlier today with a lawyer client about how I do that. I do a lot of work with real estate. Real estate's a content heavy industry. I had a call just before this with a real estate client. We're doing their newsletters, getting content out. Really industries that tell stories. And I do work in a whole lot of other industries as well, from healthcare to education, to investing and insurance, some nonprofits. And I say I tell stories for a living. So it's different forms of that. It's blogs, newsletters, articles, web copy, ebooks, whatever the case may be. I don't do the web design and all that myself. I have a lot of resources and agencies that I connect my clients with if they need that, social, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm the wordsmith. I'm the guy who comes up with, the words, and it's gone really well. I've been running this for about 2 years, fairly full time. Now totally full time the last couple months. And thankfully, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's great word of mouth referrals, and I'm just having the best time of my life.
And certainly with the pandemic, a lot of focus. Let's maybe look at it broadly, as you mentioned, all the different real estate and things like that. But you mentioned the business of law, right? And um, things like having a blog, things like having really good content on your website. What, when you talk with your lawyer clients, what are the sort of things that often get forgotten, right? In the practice of law, I mean, it's one thing, but how does that all help in terms of driving business and certainly getting clients, really, right, from the work that's doing? And what are sort of the mistakes that, especially smaller firms that that may not have the same budget, let's say, as a Bay Street firm in terms of doing those things? What are the things that they can do at a fairly low budget for getting kind of out there and connecting with their audience?
Sure. So there's a couple different sort of pieces to that question. The thing that and I just mentioned it, but the lawyers forget really quickly that the public doesn't understand what they're talking about half the time. You have to, when you're in the legal world, you forget, for a lot of ordinary people, I'll say that, what seeing a lawyer is like. Some people have never consulted with a lawyer before, or a legal professional. They're terrified. See, lawyers is this, that have this image of all of us being in ivory towers, and these Bay Street skyscrapers and charging an absolute fortune, which that last part might be right. But that this law is this kind of impenetrable, scary world, and so they're not usually calling in a lawyer unless they absolutely have to, and it's usually not good news. So making law approachable, making sure that people can understand who you are and what you do is super important. Having a website that is that really easy to read level, that explains what sets you apart from your competition, but just that really focuses on making you accessible to others is so important, and have digital presence that aligns with that. The mistake that I see, I joke about my father's old website. My father's a chiropractor. We had a small health clinic, and he finally got himself a website in the early 2000s that my cousin did up for him. And it was, it could have been done in GeoCities. Very simple kind of, photo and, a little bit of text and some colors, and that's it. Pardon me, and I see websites for lawyers like that still that haven't been touched since 2004. They are, like I'll like looking at a tombstone, because they're that dead and they're that stagnant. It's, the whatever was written on there and from day one is still what's written on there. And I see young lawyers making the same mistake. Younger lawyers get it more so. They get the whole importance of having a digital presence, but even still, they're busy, and you're just too busy. Your law is about juggling multiple fires at once, and you have deadlines that are pressing, and you got emails to respond to, and your phone is pinging while your inbox is pinging while you're talking to your assistant and dictating something else, and there's always something on fire at any given time. So things like marketing or blogging, maybe things that you want to do, but they get pushed to the back burner because you're busy putting out fires. The problem is that part is what actually does your client development, and that's what sends people through the door. And when you're done putting out fires, you need more clients coming through, or else you're the one on fire. And you need to actually have the digital presence to be able to do that. Digital is just super easy and affordable way to do things right now. I mean, when my father was doing his thing, I think he ran some Rogers television commercials at one point in the 90s, but to pay for like TV or radio advertising, these are crazy budgets. This is still, people, the big firms with hundreds of thousands of dollars, they might be paying, big money for ads. But for a small firm, you don't have that kind of money to spend on marketing. Might have a couple hundred, a couple $1,000s, to play with, each month or quarter. Well, what are you going to do with that? So you get the importance of having a website that looks good and keeping it fresh. And then what really keeps a website fresh is content, and having that content, on the go. So having two blogs that you wrote, at the start of last year, and a blog that you have not touched in 15, 18 months, it's not really a blog. It's kind of dead. Like there's just nothing there. You want to have a consistent flow of information for multiple purposes. Number one, you can use it in other ways. Use it to drive your social, use it to push content to your social feeds, repurpose that information for your blog, for your Facebook, for your Instagram, for Twitter, what have you. Stay in a really consistent message, number one. Number two is Google is crawling your page, and they're looking to say, hey, here's the questions people are asking. What does a criminal lawyer do? When do I need a criminal lawyer? What do I need to, in a real estate lawyer, what have you? I'm just spitballing here. But Google is crawling to see who can answer those questions and who knows that stuff. So they're going through your site, so even if your readership is not on fire from day one, don't sweat it. Keep putting out content. And so then hiring someone like me becomes, frankly, the really affordable solution, because I am not going to break your budget. I'm not going to charge you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. My goodness, I'd love to, but no. So for a couple $100 here and there, we can get some blogs together. You can then go turn around and use that time as billable time. So that time you're going to spend hours writing that blog, forget it. Have someone who knows what the heck you're talking about, who can mimic your voice, do the writing, while you go off and actually make that money as billable time. And then make sure that on top of that, that writing is going to be writing that drives traffic in, that people like reading. So there's ways of doing things affordably. You can sink a lot of money into digital and SEO and such, and there's money that should be spent, there's no question. But if you're on a small budget, there's still ways to do some really effective work.
That's great insight there, and certainly, how much of it in terms of coming up with is there like these big powwows there, or do they is it easier for them to say, look, here's what I want, go to it, Shaun, there, and let me see what the end result, what sort of is, or does it differ? I guess probably from client to client.
It totally differs client to client. I like a really collaborative process. I'm open to whatever my client prefers. I just got off the phone with a client who's actually in the employment bar. So I know that world pretty well. I've written employment law blogs, not with my eyes closed, but it's something that I can do, with a lot more ease than an area that I don't know at all. So I have an idea of the topics and what people want to see. And it was interesting sort of talking to the marketing manager at that firm, because the lawyer who runs the firm is usually reticent to kind of, give up the reins. But it's been a really good situation where it's been collaborative on sort of coming up with ideas. And then, I sort of will take a stab at a draft, and usually I'm pretty on the money, but if I'm not, we have to make some changes. I have clients, where we work collaboratively on content calendars. I have, it depends on sort of what's going on. Blogs, I'll usually take the first draft, and if it needs fixing up, we'll fix it. Or if they were thinking in a different direction, we'll fix it. These are not complicated pieces that I do. I'm not out to tell the most complicated stories. I'm not obviously giving legal advice at all. You're not giving legal advice on your website, so it's not heavily substantive stuff. I shy away from going, deep into case law, or if we have to touch case law at all, or deep into legal principles. People don't want to read that. They want to know what they need to know, where your skills are, how you can help. And that's the last point I'll make on that is that the person reading that material might not be your ideal client. They just will understand it enough to be able to refer you work. They should be able to read it and go, oh, that's interesting. That's good to know. Oh, that sounds a lot like my sister, brother, cousin, friend, neighbor, hairdresser, what have you, who was just talking about this. I'm going to flip this to them. That happens all the time with my clients. And that's another way that business grows. So keep your work accessible enough and your content accessible enough that the person reading it might not need you tomorrow, but they might know somebody who does. And that's a great referral source.
Perfect. Now, thank you, Shaun, for taking the time here and joining us. Always like look at the clock and I'm like, oh, it's already been an hour almost. So, always interesting there. And I think it's really important, for any of the law students or my paralegal students listening. Certainly, you get enough of, here's the different areas in law and where they thrive in and enjoy it. But it's also important to know that your law degree is not just a path to partnership and beyond, and it's okay if that is, you realize, as you've eloquently told us here today, it's not for me, right? And it doesn't mean that it's any differently than the colleagues or your classmates that are still on Bay Street or wherever they are. So what can you say, maybe any final words of wisdom for law students, paralegal students, young lawyers, paralegals who are practicing about, kind of what we were talking there, about any advice there about, is this for me, and what to do kind of if you're at a crossroads there?
I've been through my own mental health struggles, and my approach, especially coming out of, the rough patch I went through after leaving law, is that life is too short not to find joy. And the joy comes from different sources, and it might come from your work. It might not. We, as an employment lawyer, I'll tell you, we have a problem where we define ourselves by our work. Who you are and what you do becomes how you define yourself, and that shouldn't always be. There's a lot of people out there who might not love their 9 to 5, but they have this, passion project they're involved with evenings and weekends, whether it's volunteering, painting, mentorship, what have you, and that's their sweet spot, and that's great. So not everybody loves their job all the time, but if you're really not happy, then you have to kind of assess, okay, is this working for me? Is this what I want to do? Law is hard because it's a big investment of cost. I am still paying off my illegal debts from law school, and that'll go for a good, it's blended with my mortgage now, but it'll go for a long time. So it can feel like it's a bit of a box, but it's no amount of money is worth being miserable every day of your life. So really stop to think. If this is for you, great. If you need to make a change, there are people who can help. There are people who consult in this. There are people who provide counseling, period. Don't hesitate to seek the help, no matter where you can find it. The Law Society itself, if you're a member of the Law Society, has a great EAP that can offer some counseling. The conversation is opening, but needs to be just open so much wider. So talk to people, feel people out, be honest with others and with yourself, and really kind of see. And if it's not for you, there's other ways of, doing business. I'm living proof of that.
Excellent, and certainly there to echo the member assistance program, even for the students. As soon as you start law school or paralegal college, you are eligible. It's a free confidential service. Certainly, I've had people from Homewood Health on here in the Law Society stressing that. So, if you need that, don't hesitate to reach out and take advantage of the support systems that are in place, and certainly take care of your own happiness, right? I mean, because if you're not happy doing it or whatever, again, there are other opportunities, other things you can maybe look at, but if it's not for you, then you can use your law degree to do many different things. And even being on boards and volunteer work, that there's always going to be a legal kind of angle to it too, so don't forget about that. All right, so Shaun, all the best. Certainly seeing a lot of you from our mutual stuff that we're doing. But it's always great to hear from you, and I think thanks so much for sharing all of that, and for everyone tuning in. Take care, and see you next time.
Thank you, John Paul.